6, it's Teacher Kate. Welcome back to Online Learning, Week 2. For science class this week, we're going to be talking about the scientific method. So this is a group of steps we use as scientists to do experiments, right? Everybody loves experiments. It's the fun part of science. We get to learn and solve problems and investigate. So we're going to get a good understanding of how we do that and the setup it takes to set up a good experiment. All right, so let's take a look. All right, so we're going to take a look at the scientific method and all of the steps that make up this process we use to solve and investigate problems, right? So the scientific method is a process or a method of research that scientists use to solve problems. All right, so the scientific method that we're going to look at has 6 steps. All right, so the first step is question. Step 2, research. Step 3, hypothesis. Step 4, experiment. Step 5, results. And step 6, conclusion. All right, so these are the 6 steps and the words we're going to use to identify each step of the method. So number 1 is question, right? We have to ask a question. So we are wondering about something. We want to know why, when, what, who, how, right? Those are all good question words you can use. This question is going to help guide our research and eventually help us to form a hypothesis. So for our example experiment, our question can be, why do some plants in our house grow better than others, right? Or grow worse than others? So I am wondering, why do some plants in our house grow better than others? All right, so this is our example experiment that we are going to use and connect to all steps of the scientific method. Step 2 is research, right? So we need to search for information or gather information using sources. So we see that word sources. Sources are things that we use to get information. Examples of sources are, right, the computer, the internet, where we can look information up. Maybe a notebook, right, a science notebook from school. Or a textbook, right? You have a science textbook. Maybe there is information in there we can use about our topic. And common knowledge. So things like, if we drop a ball, we know it is going to fall to the ground, right? It is not going to go up in the air. We all know that. So that's common knowledge. So research for our example experiment would be, let's look up some information about plants. What do we know that plants need? Do you know anything that plants need? Maybe soil, water, sunlight. They need oxygen and air around them, or CO2. They also need a good temperature to live in, right? That's something we could all look up and research, and we know that plants need those things. What happens if plants get too much of those things? Right? Maybe some of them will not survive. They will not live if they have not enough water or too much sunlight or too cold of a temperature, right? Plants will not survive. So this is us doing research and gathering information. Step 3, we have to make a hypothesis. So a hypothesis is a prediction or statement of what you think is going to happen or will happen, right? So what do you think is going to happen? Is what you think and what I think going to be the same? If you said no, you are correct, right? They are not going to be the same. Everyone is not going to have the same hypothesis. People are going to think different things will happen. We can also call this an educated guess or a smart guess. We have information about our topic to predict what we think will happen. And our hypothesis must be testable. So we have to be able to figure out if it is correct or incorrect. I put these quotations up here above the picture. So often when we write a hypothesis, we can use the words I think And then we fill in what we think will happen, and we need to give a reason why. So we will use the word because. I think the plant that gets the most sunlight will grow the best because plants need light to grow. That could be my hypothesis for the experiment. You can also come up with a hypothesis for yourself for the experiment. What do you think will happen? What plant will grow the best or the worst? Good. Let's move on to the experiment. We can actually set up this experiment. An experiment is a test to check the hypothesis. So we want to find out maybe if that plant in your house that gets the most sunlight, does it grow the best? So what we could do is set up a test to check that. The test also includes, for our experiment, materials and the procedure. So the materials are the things that you need to use, right? The things that you will need to use to do the experiment. And the procedure would be the steps that you will follow. So a procedure is written out as steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So if we wanted someone to do our experiment again, they would have all of the directions to follow to do the experiment. All right? So in the experiment, we also have to talk about controls. Controls in the experiment are the things that stay the same. So they do not change and they are not being tested, right? So controls are not being tested. We use these controls for comparison. Controls of our plant experiment, if, let's say, we are going to change the amount of light. It seems as though when we planted our plants in our house, we used the same soil, we used the same plant seed, we used the same amount of water, right? So every time our plant needs water, we go around and water all of the plants. So they have been getting all of the same water, soil, and even the temperature, right? The temperature in your house, we want to stay the same. For an experiment, we talk about variables. Also, these are the things that will change. So these are the things that are changing in our experiment. If we are talking about our plants, the thing in our house that is changing is your plants are in different spots of the house that get different amounts of sunlight. So sunlight is the thing that is changing. In an experiment, there are going to be two types of variables. The independent variable is the thing that is changed. This is the only thing you want to change in the experiment. So that thing we are changing is light. The amount of light the plant is getting is the independent variable. The other type of variable that we will have, and this is only one more variable, the thing that is measured or recorded that we are going to write down. You are measuring or recording one thing in the experiment. So in our plant experiment, what are we going to be measuring? What do we want to know? So we know we are going to change the light, but changing the light, what is that going to do to the plant? Are all of the plants going to grow to the same height? No, so this is going to be the thing we are measuring. We are going to measure how tall the plant is growing, or the height of the plant, all right? For the experiment, just a review for, just gonna move myself there for this slide. Controls and variables together. So I want to review one more time. All experiments should only have one thing being changed and one thing you are testing. The one thing that we change or I change is the independent variable. So I starts with I choose what is changing. And the thing you are testing is the dependent variable. It depends on what we are testing. All other parts of the experiment are the same and should not change, and we call them controls. So again, for our example, our controls are soil, temperature, and the air, right? So the air temperature and the soil and the amount of water that each plant is getting. They are all going to stay the same. For the next slide, we are taking a look at step 5, results, right? So after we set up our experiment, we are looking at the information that we have collected. We want to call this the results, and we are organizing that data and the information that we have collected. Organizing that data can either be pictures, it could be a graph, maybe a bar graph, or a line graph, or it could be a table or chart, right? So we can organize this information so we can read it and understand it easily. Your results could also be written as a sentence or a clear statement of what you are seeing, your observations. We use this information to form a conclusion. Step 6 is the final step of the scientific method. It is a statement about what happened in the experiment and why. Why did it happen? So going back to the first step, which is, you can read it with me, question. We want to answer that question in the final step. We want to have an answer. We also want to look back at step 3, hypothesis. We're reading that sentence and we're deciding, were we correct or were we incorrect, right? Were we right or were we wrong? It's okay to be wrong here. Your hypothesis is not always going to be correct, and that is completely okay. And then lastly, we can think about, what did we learn from doing this experiment, all right? So our example for our experiment, I just put all of the information we talked about as we went through each step to review. So if you want to take some time and read through these steps and how we connected that to the plant experiment, go ahead and find this information here and read it on your own so you can understand each step of the scientific method in our example experiment. All right, so we see the first 3 steps on the first review page, and we see the final 3 steps of the scientific method on the next page. All right, so we've gone through the scientific method. We've taken a look at all 6 parts. If we want to review quickly, number 1 was question. Number 2, research. Number 3, hypothesis. Number 4, experiment. Number 5, results. And number 6, conclusion. Those are all 6 steps of the scientific method. Here in one of the final slides, I have a link up here for a review video. You can find a button on the review page to click on to play a video and watch another example on the scientific method with an example experiment, as well as a short funny song to go along with it and help you understand all of the parts. And lastly, a short little practice quiz of understanding the parts of the scientific method. So go ahead and find these buttons on this link and give it a try, all right? In week 3, next week, we're gonna take a look at an experiment and go through the scientific method and do the experiment together. So our experiment for week 3 is going to be called the ice race. What melts ice the fastest? All right, so I've put a list of the materials here underneath on this slide. If you would like to go ahead and participate with me in doing the experiment next week, this is a look at the materials that you are going to need to do the experiment with me. So you have a week if you would like to get these materials together to go ahead and participate with me next week. Please join me and do that. All right, guys, so that's it for week 2. If anybody has any questions on any of the material, please message on Google Classroom or leave a comment on any of the links if you are struggling. All right, I'll see you guys on Wednesday. Thanks.